Okay, I would like to introduce already our next speakers. It's Julien Raemy. He is a PhD candidate in digital humanities at the University of Basel. He's also interoperability and metadata consultant for the DASH and at the International Image Interoperability Framework, the IIIF. He is member of the Technical Review Committee. Currently, his working title of the dissertation is Deploying a Citizens' Humanities Infrastructure with Linked Open Usable Data, Standards, Perspectives on Interoperability and Knowledge Representation. And I already introduced also Max Frischknecht to not interrupt too much. He's also a PhD student in digital humanities at the University of Bern. He's member of the Institute of Design and Research. He's a graphic designer, programmer, and researcher, and member of the Digitale Gesellschaft, where he is engaged with questions around digital sustainability. As a part of, he is also part of the artistic collective Basel Codes and explores the potential of creative coding and co-organizing free programming class. So thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. So thank you very much, Vera, for the introduction. So today I'm going to present some reflections. First, I'm actually talking about these kind of reflections about knowledge representation through the actor network theory lens. So in the abstract on the DHCH website, I wrote that I would somehow apply ANT, and according to Bruno Latour, who mainly defined this framework, it isn't applicable to anything, but it might nevertheless be useful to treat actors as full-blown mediators and for following their traces. And I mean, I will give it a try. So my presentation will be divided into 5 parts, and I will attempt to stick to maximum 20 minutes of presentation, so enough time for a quick discussion afterwards. So when trying to serialize an object using linked art that I will introduce later, I ended up with several versions, each of them a refinement of the others, but sometimes the refinement would be just maybe just a problem, a comma would be missing, or sometimes it would be I will not understand fully enough how SciDoc CRM, which is how linked art works. I will have to refine it all the time. But sometimes it was just very small refinement, and I've imagined that actually would greatly impact on the project itself, but also even if a very small number of end users will have actually directly seen the full impact of the data model when they actually see the metadata. So this is where I realize the fluidity of my model, represented here by the serialization of just one object, and the dark is just on purpose, so we can't really see anything. So the various refinements and the potential of the latest version, which is expected to allow all the associations between entities to be traced via an application programming interface, an API, have shown me the inherent qualities of the data model as an actor. And by reading Mapping Affinities by Dario Rodriguero, and after having followed a workshop organized by a cultural anthropology research project at the University of Basel, I decided to see how I could associate my PhD thesis with the actor network theory. So there is no doubt that for me, data, but also data models, are fully fledged actors that take part in the social networks the actor network theory describes, in which both humans and non-humans intertwine and overlap. So quite still new to actor network theory, but yeah, I'm going to try to elaborate on it by providing a few insights. So in his book, We Have Never Been Modern, Latour explained that there are paradoxes of nature and society. The proliferation of hybrids has saturated the framework on the moderns, and we need to deploy both dimensions at once, so nature and society, to accommodate the hybrids. Here you can see them as quasi-objects, and give them a place, a name, a home, a philosophy, an ontology, and Bruno Latour hopes a new constitution. So ANT is not, however, the establishment of symmetry between humans and non-humans, Rather, to be symmetric means not to impose an a priori asymmetry among human intentional action and the material world of casual relations. So basically, he explained later that he doesn't want to maintain together nature and society, but what he had in mind was not society and nature, but neither. Hence, have joined the solutions for both connectors and to rethink what the society and what nature is. So here's the first definition. Actor network theory aims at describing the very nature of societies. But to do so, it does not limit itself to human individual actors, but extends the word actor or actor, actant, the non-human, non-individual entities. So Lato wanted to drop the label for something more elaborate, such as sociology of translation, sociology of associations, and that's actually what I wanted to do, to use that in my PhD, because I'm always talking about data modeling and knowledge representation and predicates and so on. Another word would have been actant rhizome ontology, if we think of Gilles Deleuze. But Lato decided to keep it nevertheless, as the acronym is still a perfect fit for, I quote, a blind traveler. He has some definitions of the core concept. The first one, the most important one, is actor, actant. And as you may have guessed, there may be human and non-human entities. The difference between actor and actant is that the former makes a given impact and the latter has no figuration yet. According to NT, a network should be understood as a string of actions where each participant is treated as a full-blown mediators. Full-blown mediators just being another word for actor. And finally, for translation, maybe something more abstract, but it is about how two or more mediators can be induced. There are 5 more major controversies or uncertainties regarding the social sciences that NT wants to address. If we want to follow the social fluid through its ever-changing and provisional shapes, we should learn how to feed off uncertainties instead of deciding in advance what the furniture of the world should look like. So first, the nature of group. There exist many contradictory ways for actors to be given an identity. The nature of actions. In each course of action, a great variety of agents seems to be to barge in and displace the original goals. The nature of objects. The type of agencies participating in interaction seems to remain wide open. The nature of facts. The links of natural sciences with the rest of society seems to be a source of continuous dispute. So anti is a form of constructivism that rejects the idea of the social determination of scientific knowledge. And I think that's why I really want to apply that in digital humanities, because it doesn't really matter if we are digital or humanities. And finally, about the type of studies done under the label of a science of the social, as it's never clear in which precise social sciences can be said to be empirical. So in this way, Lato recommends the use of writing accounts where all entities have been described. So now, with this very short deep dive into ANT, come the point where I'll give you some more information about the PI research projects in which I'm doing my PhD and in which the data model is going to be is being developed. So PIA, for Participatory Knowledge Practices in Analog and Digital Image Archives, is a project funded by the Swiss National Science Foundation, led by the University of Basel, the Bern Academy of the Arts, and with very close collaboration with the Swiss Society for Folklore Studies. PIA wants to connect the world of data and things in an interdisciplinary manner. And we would like to explore the phases of the analog and digital archives from the perspective of cultural anthropology, technology, and design. So our project is based on 3 collections of the photo archive of the Swiss Society for Folklore Studies. And with these 3 photographic collections, so Atlas, Kreis, and Brunner, as example, we're developing different interfaces that enable the collaborative indexing and use of archival materials. So this is something that I'm not doing really part of the PhD, but really for the project, is that we have what each project knows, a database migration. And I had the chance to look at so SSFS, or the SQFile data model, and decided to change a few of those properties, because we are going to do crowdsourcing, we're going to use machine learning in some ways, and some of the properties will not allow some of the new metadata to be included. One of the biggest change is, to me, the idea of what an object is, and that actually connects maybe well with what Latour says, is that beforehand we had image, film, Tonbildschau, even album, and I just deprecate them in favor of just one class, so class in terms of, so an RDF class, and give them representation. So basically an object can be digitized 5-6 times. It could be whole history about that object. So the metadata will remain the same, but then you will have representation in different forms, be it audio, 3D, doesn't really matter. What matters is how these are connected and structured. So here are just for an example for one, so the SQFile object, very simple properties most of the time about duration. So there's actually quite a lot of them, because you try to incorporate all types of media resources, and then the connection with other classes through collection data sets. The agent is also another one, where it could be persons, it could be institution, and then the representation in the 3. It's not really important to see all of this, but what's important is that I tried to map this with other vocabulary and classes. Here most of the time schema.org, which is something that is quite known on the web, but it's quite trivial in terms of how deep you can go. So because schema.org and the SQFile data model is still very object-centric, I'm using linked art, which is based on Cydox theorem. It has an event-centric representation, and it was also to think that not to overload the SQFile data model that is actually not only for our 3 collections, but for the rest of the corpus. And then we can do more interesting stuff with the 3 collections where we're doing that. What is quite, so linked art isn't an application profile of Cydox theorem, but to RDF, which is not very scalable in its way, most of this serialization here, use JSON LD and the Getty vocabularies. You can use other vocabularies to do reconciliation, be it icon class or others. But really, the idea here is that the ontology is just one part with very strict properties selected from Cydox theorem, which is known mostly in archaeological and museum world. But here you can define most of the things through these important classes that you see on the left-hand side, so digital objects, events, groups, people. And here you can already see the connection with the SQFile data model, so that I know when there is something from the SQFile that comes to our projects, I would know how to map that. I will try to map that though. So here's one, how you can, if you think again about Bruno Latour, there are different representations. So the first one on the left-hand side is really, well, how these nodes will be connected in linked art, how they will be represented. I did it once by hand. This is the last time that I'm going to do that, because it takes a very long time. And it's interesting to do so as an exercise. But then the end result is what you see on the right-hand side. So basically the JSON LD representation. So what we have to do in our project is to see how we can map the database, how we can map different APIs, and to feed actually that new object. But that new object is linked and has representations. So we also take sometimes also very biased arguments. So for this image, the Menschmasse und Populärflugzeuge, I think that's the title that was given, I treat it as a digital object, even if it used to be a physical object. It's just that it's easier to do so with different representation. But if I say so, we need to document that and explain why we decided to take that stance and why we actually make it available in this way. So here's just a snapshot, just a part of that representation, because it's very unlikely that descriptions provided in the PR data model are the only digital representations of the entities that they describe. They can also be in other websites that we don't know, or maybe a journal that has actually used the images from the Swiss Society for Folklore Studies and so on. So for building human readable views in linked art, or just to linking to existing web pages, these other digital resources should also be referenced. So they could be web pages, as I said, 3D renderings, and other services or APIs. And here's just one example of how TripIF is connected to linked art. TripIF beat another matter of concerns or objects in the ANT world described by Bruno Latour. So I tried a very unapplicable sketch to see how our PR data model could be, how the different participants resolved around that PR data model. Basically, it is influenced by both the major one, even if it is smaller in its part, by the SKFAR data model, but then that one, which is going to be on the Dash service platform, which works for, the long-term data of humanities in Switzerland, has also very constraints from this meta-ontology that is called NORA, and NORA feeds an API and so on. So you see that even if I take very small actions, that can actually, through crowdsourcing, through our metadata enrichment, it could have very great impact, even if they may be very small. And for the visual effect on the graphical user interface, it may not change anything. But in my PhD, I'm interested to see how participation happen in application programming interface, how machines can actually use the data in a very structured manner. And that changes a lot, because I need structured information and they need to be informed all the way through. So the best way to proceed, according to ANT, and it's maybe very boring, but it's to feed off actually the fifth source of uncertainty, is to keep track of all the moves, even those that deal with the very production of the accounts. And that's something that social sciences sometimes do not do. They just look at, and then they write about it, but they did not include themselves in the process. And that's something ANT really says, no, you should also include yourself in it, because you're going to impact those, and those are going to impact you all the way through. How are they going to impact you? That's another question. But talks about 4 different kinds of notebooks. You can have a log, cards. I really like the third one, that's where I excel at, the ad libitum, so basically just trials, and then the effects. And then I thought, well, I've already done some of the things, and some of the things already exist. So for the log, we use GitHub for all the software and microservices that we have. For example, when we generate TripIF manifests. So here, the log, when there is some of the change in my notebook, I could actually feed information directly from the software, from the Git log to this new log. On the Dash service platform side, there is an event log, so something also when the metadata actually changes, we know which person did it, which property has been amended, and that could be also quite interesting here. As for the cards, now I just have a very rough approximation of things that I tagged on Zotero, but there is also on our project, the Denkdatenbank, so where we have some information. So those could be interesting and so on. My goal is, maybe it seems boring to use ANT just if you end up with physical or virtual notebooks, but the idea is really a self-reflections. And also it changed my perspectives, just to think that actually it doesn't really matter if I'm using something that is more common maybe in the social sciences. Are we digital? Are we humanities? Does it really actually matter? I don't think so. What really matters for me is more how these information coalesce together. And I like to think that my data model is an actor. That's maybe a bit selfish, but it's true. So on the PhD, on the website, I'm going to build that on a given website soon. Not now, you can't really see anything. And the idea afterwards is maybe, well, I'm using open APIs and that kind of stuff. Maybe what I'm doing as a very meta abstract level, I could also have an API on sort of like a notebooks API where you can actually find information, how I structured my information. And maybe someone would actually see those data, but I doubt that. Thank you for the conclusion. Yeah, just a very short conclusion. So writing accounts of traces network where all the actors do something. It's something that I'm going to reassemble or reorganize in those digital notebooks. Treating the PRDT model as a matter of concern. So I haven't explained that. Actually, Latour said that there are two types of objects, matter of concern or matter of fact. And also, further down the road, something very important is Susan Leistar talk about boundary objects, and I really want to know how this can also apply. So she also was in this ANT school of thought, and that could be something quite interesting as well. And finally, there are hybrids everywhere, and we need to, well, that's how it is. But data are full-fledged actors. I think I already said that. But I hope that by using, or I can't say applying now, but by having a ANT lens, I can have some kind of self-reflections that could be useful not only for the data model, but for other digital humanities projects. Thank you very much.